So I'm delighted to say that we're going to start the CorelDRAW Graphics Suite Deep Dive webinar today. The webinar is scheduled for an hour. I'm delighted to welcome Mo Yogi, who is an independent visual communications guy who works closely with Corel, but he doesn't work for Corel, and he's going to walk you through the latest version of CorelDRAW today. Both myself, I'm Jo Levens, and Giovanni Ragusa work for Corel. We're on hand to answer any of your questions, but you are in silent mode. So I'd like to point out that if you would like to ask any questions, please do so. We'll read out relevant questions to Mo either during the presentation or at the end, where we see a sort of gap where it makes sense. So please, in the navigation panel on the right-hand side, post a question if you want something answered by either Mo or ourselves. So with that, I think we'll get started, and I'm delighted to introduce Mo to kick us off and walk us through the latest version of CorelDRAW Graphics Suite 2018.
Okay, let's see. Can you guys all hear me okay?
Yeah, the sound is great.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Jo, and thank you everybody for attending wherever you might find yourself on the pale blue dot. We're going to talk about CorelDRAW from the perspective of design and what the value proposition is from a design perspective, rather than a feature perspective. Of course, we'll be touching on the new tools and see how we can best get value from all of the tools that have been packed into this version of CorelDRAW. So a bit of background about myself. I'm MJ, and I'm a designer. I write, I make my own art, of course, fine art, and of course we try and be activists throughout our lifetime. So I do a bit of that. I educate as well, and of course, like all of you, I'm a student of life. I'm hoping through this and other interactions, we can build a global community, a Corel family, if you will, where we can share ideas. You know, I learn from you, you learn from me, that kind of vibe. So with that, I'd like to jump in. Enough about me. Let's talk about Corel Graphics Suite. And of course, the difficulty with a webinar is, of course, you know, it's a droning monologue. So I'll try not to drone too much. Again, as I said, there's some really cool content on the Corel YouTube channel, which I encourage you to check out. There's a beautiful preview from the product manager, Gerard, which you can go and have a look at as well. I really wanted to kind of share with you some of the value I derive from Corel Graphics Suite 2018 as a designer and an artist. And hopefully, you know, we can kind of share ideas through the platform and through the chat as we go along. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically minimize the chat pod, which means I won't be seeing it during the rest of the presentation. So forgive me if I do come across as being rude. It's not that, it's just that I can't see the chat pod. And of course, Gio and Joe are on hand to kind of give guidance as we go along. So with that said, let's dive into the value proposition that is Corel Graphics Suite 2018. So the first thing I'd like to do is share with you some of the kind of hidden things that you may want to jump into. And that, of course, is off the welcome screen. If we go to get more, there's a couple of tools and additional bits and bobs that Corel have built into the suite that don't install straight off the bat. And one of those, I think Joe will be talking about in a future webinar, is Aftershot, which is you know, an image and photographic management tool that of course ships now with this latest iteration of Graphics Suite. Beyond that, there's a whole host of other bits and bobs that you'll see. One that I quite like is BenVista Photo Zoom. And if we have some time towards the end of the session, I'll definitely chat to you about that. But in a nutshell, what it allows you to do is it allows you to kind of upscale. Don't we all have this challenge, hey? Kind of upscale content that is low res. And of course, we all have been relying very heavily on bicubic upsampling, but this uses all sorts of kind of fractal algorithms like S and X splines, which are really, really helpful. Now you'll note that there's stuff you can buy, and you'll notice that some of the content says owned, which means I've downloaded them already. And if I go to my library, you can see some of the content I've downloaded. So some bits and bobs that you'll find really interesting, I think, are some of the bitmap and fountain fill bundles, as well as the typography bundles that are available to you at no cost. So I'm going to focus on the no cost stuff, of course, and you can see there are some of the elements that you can go and buy additionally. And if you happen to be dialing in from the US, you'll notice that you can go and buy some of the Wacom tool sets as well. The pricing you're seeing, of course, is localized. So myself being based in Johannesburg, South Africa, I'm getting rand values. If you happen to be in the US, you'd get dollar values. In Europe, you'd get euro, and so on and so on and so on. Excuse me. So that's on the goodies side. Do definitely check out the Get More panel from the welcome screen. I beg your pardon. And do download some of these elements and plugins that you'll definitely get value from. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump into CorelDRAW. And one of the first things that we all kind of get tremendous value from, or at least from a design perspective, I'm not quite sure why I've gotten a frog in my throat, so I apologize for that, is this concept of managing time, right? I mean, we all bill by hour, we build by project, and that essentially means that we need to validate what we're doing by time. And if you, like myself, are running a studio with a couple of designers and creative folk running about, we need to validate time, and we need to justify the time spent on projects. And of course, what's pretty helpful for us from a design perspective and from a billing perspective in this particular version, as well as an efficiency perspective, is this concept of a project timer. So I'm going to go ahead and right-click on the main control bar, and you'll see that as I come down, I have this option called Project Timer. What this is going to allow us to do is it's going to allow us to track the time as I'm working through CorelDRAW. So what I'm going to do here is just to share with you very quickly how this works without getting too technical about it. Is the first thing is I'm going to enable the timer, so it's starting to track now. Of course, I don't want it to be called task 1, so I'll go ahead and change that. And I'll just call this Corel Prezo, right? So off we go then. And of course, what it's now doing is it's tracking my time. And as an aside, what you're able to do is you're able to then export this either as a text file or a comma separated file, which can then go into your Excel worksheets or Pastel or whatever accounting system you might be working on. So that, of course, offers you a huge amount of value from an efficiency and a billing perspective, and something that is definitely well worth a look at. Another tool that I find tremendous value from when I chat to folks using CorelDRAW on a day-to-day basis is the concept of clip art, right? I mean, Corel just packs so much stuff into their offering. I often wonder how they actually cut a profit. And one thing that we kind of lean on as CorelDRAW uses very heavily is the use of clip art and fonts and so on. And for that, what I would recommend you look at, if you haven't already, is of course Corel Connect. So Connect is your connection point, if you'll forgive me for the punnery, an insight into all of your content on both Corel Content Exchange, so your 10,000 clip art, your fonts, your fills, your photo frames, etc. And here I'm just going to zip through. Let's go through any folder. It doesn't really matter. Here I'm in animals, and that's where all of your stuff's living. What I tend to like to do is I tend to create these trays for every project that I'm working on. And here, you know, as you're working, you're kind of collating content. And generally what you would find in the design experience, I'm sure it's no different, yours is no different to mine, is that you collect more content that then you kind of use in the final output. So as you're kind of designing and as you're kind of researching your design project, you'll be probably popping content in here. And you'll see that I've created a tray here specifically for this presentation, which we'll be sharing with you as we kind of go through the presentation. Additionally, what you're able to do is you're able to create favorite folders. Now, the user experience from a Windows Explorer perspective is this. I'm quite a visual person, as everybody on this call is. And it would be nice if we could kind of get a preview of the Corel file that we're working with. Well, if you use Connect, you can. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this folder here, Corel 2018, on the far left on my favorites folder. This is the folder we're going to be working through today. And what you're now seeing is the actual CDR files that we'll be working through, but you're able to see them visually. So you're getting a sense of what we're going to be talking about, and no doubt you can see that we're going to dive into Symmetry straight off the bat. So let's go ahead and do that. So from here, it's a simple double click. That's going to throw us into CorelDRAW. Let's close the welcome screen. I'll just say yes to that. And excuse me. What I have here is if you've ever done this by hand, it's great fun. There's some great YouTube videos out there on how to kind of take best use of your compass since, you know, kind of senior high school, I guess. But, you know, very complex iterations of pattern, whether it's twofold, fourfold, or sixfold pattern. And of course, what we're going to do is just kind of explore symmetry. So here's a kind of symmetrical expression of something that would probably take me, at least, not having as many brain cells as most people on the planet, probably a little while, you know, an hour plus, because there's lots of kind of guidelines that you're drawing, etc. What I like about these tool sets, of course, is I'm just going to go to the next iteration of this. So it's simply an iteration of, and what I wanted to share with you is a couple of components, and then we'll go ahead and build it, okay? So what we have here is, let me get this guy started. What we have here is we've got a couple of components. The actual orb is made up of the use of the Symmetry tool, which we're going to be talking to in a minute. You'll see I've got some guidelines here that I've obviously used the alignment and guidelines, interactive guidelines Docker to do. The background is made up of grid paper, so, you know, different use of grid paper. And I'm very fond of the drop shadow tool. So in the past, what I would do is I would create the shape that I wanted, and then I would go ahead and convert it to a bitmap, and then of course apply a Gaussian blur, which works extremely well. And then I got to thinking, well, can I keep it vector? And the answer is yes. So here what you're looking at is you're looking at the drop shadow of an object that actually has got a black fill, but it's not visible. And we're going to go ahead and look at that. So how would somebody create something like this from scratch, I think is probably what you're thinking at this point in time. So I've just created a blank page where you can see my grid lines, etc. I'm a little pedantic. You don't have to do this. But, you know, I guess as designers and professionals of the kind of graphics world, we tend to be a bit control freak about life, right? So what I'll do here is I'll just go ahead and throw down an ellipse for starters. So, you know, nothing complex. I'll just hold the control key in so it's a nice, perfect ellipse. And then I'll go ahead and round out these values. So I'm going to make it 150 by 150 millimeters each. Slap the return key on that, and I'm going to hit the letter P, which is going to nest it perfectly in the center. So that's kind of just the kind of guide circle that I'd like to be working with. And then what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this. So shortcut is, of course, Control D. And I've changed my duplicate value to fall at 0 and 0. So it's going to fall exactly on top of the object that I'm duplicating. I'll go through the menu options as far as I possibly can so you can see what I'm doing. And you can kind of try it out back at your office in front of your desk when you get there. So what I'm going to do now is I just would like to scale this down to about half of the radius. And the way I'm going to do that, or diameter in this case, and the way I'm going to do that is by way of nesting the left edge, being left-handed. And so I'm going to go ahead and lock out the left edge on the object origin. So what is this man talking about? Let's just go ahead and zoom in there very quickly so you can see this better. I'm going to go ahead and lock out the middle left point on our object origin. So what that means is as we go ahead and make changes, these changes are going to affect off that point that my mouse is hovering over at this point in time. So let's go ahead and make that half the diameter. So I'll go 75 a piece, and you can see it's locked, so I'll just need to do one side. And using this element then, I'm going to go ahead, let's just pick up the pick tool quickly. I'm going to go ahead and do a right click on that and choose create symmetry. So we're now in symmetry mode. And of course, what I'm going to go ahead and do, because I've got my symmetry sitting dead center on the page as well, we've got a perfect kind of seamless meeting of the two objects. And in fact, for this type of exercise, the odd numbers seem to work better. So that's 2 mirrors, and that's 3 mirrors. A lot more exciting, as you probably would agree. It's a pity I can't see you guys. That's 4, and that's 5, and that's 6, and that's 7. So 7 looks quite cool. Let's try 9. I'm going to go for 7, okay? I'll just drop back down to 7. Now, again, at the top, let's zoom in to that on the main toolbar. What you'll see is you've got a whole host of controls. And one of these controls is, of course, you can choose to show the full preview, or you can choose to show the kind of guideline view, if you will. And of course, you've got other controls here in terms of how many repeats you're going to have, the origin of your actual center point in terms of the mirroring. And then, of course, if you're working with open path, which is not relevant here, that's why it's grayed out. You have the ability to fuse them together so you actually can fill them very effectively. So I'm going to go ahead and click on show me the full preview. And then let's go ahead and zoom out for a second. In a couple of seconds, you can see we've created quite a complex object without a lot of fuss. Now, one of the other cool things, whilst we're still in here, is, of course, coloring this object becomes a real breeze as well. And I'm kind of on the steel gray vibe for some reason, so I'm just going to stick with that color for now. I'm going to go ahead and choose the Smart Fill tool. And as opposed to now me individually going and clicking on all of these, watch what happens. So as we're moving through the color set, I'm just going to go to every alternate one. Very quickly, you can see that we can go ahead and color this out without a lot of fuss. So that's looking pretty compelling. What I'm going to do now is you'll notice that my pages and everything else has disappeared. So it kind of basically just goes into this kind of zoomed mode where you focus on the symmetry almost exclusively. So just below your symmetry object, you're then able to tell the computer, listen, I'm done basically with this editing. So I'm going to jump out of that mode. And now you can see I'm kind of back into kind of vanilla flavored Corel. And of course, let's talk about some of the other possibilities before we dive on to other things. So forgiveness, I'm going to try and pack as much value into the presentation as is possible. So I'll move as swiftly as I possibly can and try not to get bogged down too much with kind of explanatory details. And of course, we can have a chat towards the end of the session, most definitely. So this object now is sitting on top of my circle. And I'd like to use, so you'll notice it's got a bit of a scalloped edge, and I'd like to kind of round it out quite nicely. So I'm going to basically select this object, and I'm going to send its order to the back of page. And of course, you know that that's Control-N. I'm deliberately trying not to use shortcuts so you can see what I'm doing as I'm going along, okay? So of course, what we then have is you can see I have an ellipse. If you look down off the bottom left of my screen, the original ellipse that we created at 150 millimeters of piece. I'd like to use that as a power clip object, but before I do that, I want to also create an object above this that's going to give us a bit of visual depth by way of an interactive transparency. So I'm going to duplicate this ellipse So we have 2 copies of the ellipse. What I'll then do is I'm going to select my symmetry rather, and I'm going to go ahead and right click on that and choose Power Clip Inside. So I'm using a Wacom Mobile Studio Pro here, which really makes it a lot of fun when working with CorelDRAW because it's very sensitive to these devices. So that's going to round out the edge, as you'll see there. So we've got a nice round edge now. We've gotten rid of the scalloping. And what I'll then do is I'll go ahead and select the second copy of the circle. Let's just deselect that. The second copy of the circle. So this guy's sitting in front, and I'm going to push him back as well. Let's do that very quickly. Order to back of page. I could use the object manager to kind of select the individual objects as well, but this works perfectly fine. So I've got the ellipse selected. I'm going to lose the outline color. You'll see I've got an outline color on this. So I'm just going to get rid of that. So you can see I've got no fill and no stroke at this point in time. And I'll just go and choose any color. Let's go for black, okay? So that's going to fill the entire screen with black, and that doesn't look very good, of course. It always gets worse before it gets better, doesn't it? I'll click on transparency over here. And then what I'll do is I'll go ahead and just start off with a kind of transparency like that. So now we're kind of creating depth. And of course, I can go and play with these points as well. But I want to just get through to the core values of the tool, and then you obviously would have an opportunity to play and explore, and I'm quite sure you're going to come up with an amazing design. When I do this type of thing, I tend to like to go to multiply as a transparency option. What that does is it just kind of gives you a very deep, strong, beautiful shadow. So let's go ahead and hit F3, which will zoom us out just a touch. Just need to jump onto that. And what we'll then do is, let me do it this way. What we'll then do is we'll go ahead and introduce a kind of cast shadow. So drop shadows are valuable, and in this case, it wouldn't work because we actually want to give the illusion of this orb hovering in space. And the way we're going to do that is I'm simply going to go ahead and draw an ellipse. So I'll start off the center line here. And then I'm going to hold Shift in, which allows it to kind of grow out both directions. So about that should do it quite nicely, okay? Again, I'm going to lose the fill. And then it doesn't matter which color you choose, but I'll go for black. And of course, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to introduce the drop shadow. Now, the drop shadow tool in the last iteration of Corel had gotten a really good, solid speed bump in the quality of the shadow that it produces by way of the Gaussian filter that they built in. Really, really nice. I'm pretty glad about it because, you know, in the past it would mean taking the object to a bitmap. So you can see there's my shadow. Of course, I can arrange position and all of that, but really what I'm after, you guys, is a nice soft edge. So I'm focusing very much on the shadow here, and yeah, that's looking pretty good. Now, remember I said to you that I would like to keep the object. So often what I've been doing in the past is, of course, at this point, breaking the object apart and then deleting the circle. But I found another trick that you may find handy, and that's again by way of transparency, right? So with the object selected, I'm just going to jump out of the transparency tool. The object selected, I'm going to go ahead and jump onto the transparency tool here, the interactive transparency tool. And I'm just going to choose a global transparency up at the top, so uniform transparency. Please excuse me, there we go. And here where we've got our 50% array, I'm going to jump that all the way up to 100. And now the object has disappeared, but we've kept the shadow, which means that we still have access to the vector information on that object should we need it. Okay, so I'm hoping you guys are hearing me okay and everything is going just snazzy on your end. Let's jump onto something else that's pretty exciting. So I have no doubt that you guys have seen the CorelDRAW 2018 kind of logo lockup. It's quite an inspirational one, and I thought I'd use that as a kind of descriptor for a power duplicate and see how they possibly made that, okay? So for starters, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump onto the pick tool, and then, of course, what I'm going to do is I'm going to double-click the page edge. And I use this as a way for drawing a quick box or rectangle, if you will, that's exactly the same size as my page by clicking on Add Page Frame here. not necessarily a new feature, but a handy one nonetheless. And then I'm going to go ahead and fill that with black. Okay, so I've just got the first leaf to get us going, so we don't waste a lot of time. I'm going to go ahead and right-click, obviously first select the leaf, right-click on that, and then go ahead and create a symmetry. So you'll see that there's my symmetry mode. Again, I can go ahead and change position, etc. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to jump this up. So the maximum number of symmetry elements you can have, or planes, just zoom in there so you can see this better, is 12. So let's just short circuit that, and there you have it, okay? So let's assume we're happy with that. Go ahead and hit F4, and let's go ahead and zoom out to that, and say to the computer, yes, I'm happy with that symmetry. What I'd like to do next is I'd like to make a copy of this. So I'm going to go ahead and select this object, and I'm going to choose Edit and Duplicate. Of course, you can use the shortcut if you want. And with that done, let's go ahead and do two things. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and make this a little smaller, holding the Shift key in. Right, so it does it from all sides. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just give this a bit of a rotate, holding the Control key in, so it will jump like 15 degrees. Now, Corel has memorized all of what I've done there, which means that if I go Control-D on my keyboard, I can quickly create something that's quite compelling. Okay, good. So that's enough about symmetry. There's one last thing that I'm not necessarily going to show, but will explain. So if you're doing something like a fourfold, this is a fourfold pattern, and if you're wanting to kind of do different elements in terms of coloring of this, this of course is relatively easy as well. And Gio has a little surprise for you at the end of it, so I'm not going to be spoiler alert. So I'm sure he'll kind of share that with you a little later. So that's symmetry. Let's move on because we've got lots to talk about. So I'm going to jump into Connect again, and you can see I'm using Connect as my kind of go-to point in terms of what I'm going to be talking about next. The next thing I'd like to talk about is I'd like to talk about the block shadow tool. Again, a new tool that has tremendous value. Did I hear a voice come through?
Yes, I wanted to interrupt for a second. Hi, everyone. I've managed to fix my machine and everything is working now, so I'm here.
Good. Mm-hmm. Oh, so that in case you're wondering, everybody, that's the voice of Giovanni. Gio, do you want to introduce yourself and say a few quick words?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Giovanni Ragusa. I'm the sales director here at Corel. I will be giving you an update on the commercial side later on. Just as a reminder, if you have any questions during during the presentation, feel free to ask any questions. We are reading them, so we can answer some of them even real time. So just to let you know.
Thanks, Gio. So Gio's the gentleman that makes all of this possible. So thank you to you, Gio, and to Joe as well. Okay, so back to the grindstone, I guess. I'm going to drop into wireframe mode for just a sec, so you can see what we've got here. So I've got a yellow rectangle, and on top of which I have some yellow text which says hello. So it's a very friendly piece of design. Let's jump back to the enhanced view, and I wanted to express the drop shadow, which again is not a very new feature. So I'll take just 10 seconds of your time to illustrate this. And what I'm pretty excited about is, of course, the Gaussian feature. Beautiful, beautiful shadows. If we zoom in and have a tighter look at that, they work extremely well, even on output devices. And the key to that is you just want to ensure that you have a Gaussian blur on your control bar selected. That gives you those beautiful shadows. Okay, so that's enough of that. We want to get onto the meat of the potatoes. And what we're going to be talking about, of course, is the block shadow tool. So, of course, the block shadow tool works on the basis, again, the interactivity component makes it quite compelling. We've got something like a really bad Hertz logo going at this point in time. I'm going to go ahead and undo that because they've packed a whole lot of stuff. That's kind of at a elementary kind of level in terms of exploring the block shadow tool. And of course, as a person like you that produces content, what you're always thinking about is, so where are the production values, and has any thought gone into that? And I must say that a fair whack of thought has gone into that. So let's kind of explore this, okay? The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead with a type, and I'm going to give it just a cyan background, cyan outline rather, kind of stroke. And I'll go ahead and make that a little fatter. And I'm going to do that through the, let's see if I can move this panel a minute. There we go. If you can go down for me, please, so I can get to my object properties. Thank you very much. Go to meeting. So I'll go through to the object properties. This is kind of, I guess, for you and I, kind of the go-to place. And I've kept my text so that, you know, for obvious reasons, it's editable. And I'll go ahead and just make this around 10 point. And what I'd like to do then is I'm going to right-click on this, and I'm going to set this to overprint outline. So let me switch this off for a moment. So you can see I'm going to create a few challengers, and let's see how the computer computes. And then what I'll do is I'll go ahead and introduce a block shadow. A lot easier to work with now that I have something to work against. And we have color up at the top. So let me zoom in here for you, and you'll see that you've got your controls here at the top on your control bar once again. And I'm going to zoom out so I can get to the bottom of my screen. I'll go ahead and pick up the eyedropper, and I'll just go ahead and ensure that I'm picking up the same color. And of course, what we have here, just alongside the color chip, is the ability to overprint the block shadow. And if I enable that, of course, let's test it, right? So we'll simulate overprint. So you'll see that because we've got cyan yellow, of course, the mix is going to give us a beautiful green. And there you go. So it kind of totally works. Now, what about if you were vinyl cutting this, right? Well, let's have a look at the wireframe mode. So if I jump into wireframe mode, you'll notice that we've got clean, happy cuts with minimal node points, and this is going to cut extremely well. Well, you might say to me, well, you know what, I actually want to get rid of this. And of course, at this point in time, we probably would break it apart and then delete the bits that we don't want. But the engineers have done a really good job in taking care of that for us too, because if again you have a look at your control bar at the top here, watch the O, and we head over to this no entry sign, if you hover over it, it tells you what it does. And of course, if you look at the O now, you can see that the gap of the hole is gone. And in the case of the E, fortuitously, the way I put the drop shadow, I didn't need it, but there you go. How will this cut if I was sending this to a plotter? Absolutely fine yet again. I probably would move these two a little closer just so that they kiss better. That kiss is beautiful, right? Okay, so let's play devil's advocate. You could say, well, okay, you know, I could do this with, or something similar at least, with the extrude tool. Okay, so here, what I've done is I've created one with a block shadow, and I've created a similar type of result with the extrude tool. And of course, they each have different propositions. For example, we can drape colors, or you know, have gradients on the edges of objects using the extrude tool. Sorry, brain fart for a minute there. And of course, with the block shadow. So let's go into wireframe mode and kind of thin slice how these two would play out. And you can see that you're going to have to do a fair whack of cleanup if you were to go this route. So different strokes for different projects, definitely. But I think in the case of something like this, I think the Corel guys have done a really good job of, excuse me, iterating a tool in a very exciting way. Okay, good. So that's block shadow, and of course, we'll move on from there. Of course, if you have any questions, excuse me, if you have any questions, let's go ahead and drop that in to our chat pod. Okay, so the next thing I'd like to look at with you guys is I'd like to look at the 10 minutes to go, so I'm going to rush this a little bit. The impact tool, so I'll do less explanation with your permission, just kind of show, and then of course we can pick it up in the chat pod. Now, of course, the impact tool, I have no doubt you guys have had a look at some of the webinars. And of course, the impact tool by its very name suggests, you know, that it illustrates movement, etc., etc. The way I've used the impact tool here is, and of course, this is all clip art that you can go ahead and try out yourself, is I've used it as sun rays in a clip art experience. And then we're going to look at it in a kind of more realistic experience as well. So these strobes that you're seeing is also making use of the impact tool. So a very different kind of expression of the impact tool. So let's go ahead and look at it together, shall we? So I'll start, no smoke and mirrors. So I'll start from scratch, and I'll just go ahead and pick this dude up very quickly and drop him into play. So, this is coming from the CorelDRAW clip art library. So you can go and try this when you're back at the office. And then what I'll do is I'll go ahead and jump over to the object properties, just so that we can kind of thin slice this. Let me go ahead and minimize my tray again. The tray, of course, I made available. Let's move this guy out of the way. So we're going to be just shunting the GoToMeeting bar by way of making it available through our Dockers here. And then, of course, just dragging it to the bottom of the screen. Okay. That said, we really want to drill into the various elements. So let's move this GoToMeeting guy, this widget all the way down to the bottom. I wonder if I can nest it on the other side. I can't. Okay, so I'll go ahead and choose Object Manager. And again, just to zoom in so you can see this better, you can see that that's the CorelDRAW piece of clip art that I've brought in. And of course, I'm going to go ahead and just unfurl that so I can look through all of these elements. And I really would like to change the sky very quickly. So I'll bring in a bit of orange here at the bottom and flip out the blue to the top. So I'm not entirely happy with that. So that first curve naturally indicates the background. The second curve indicates that. So kind of just using common sense, you can work out which elements are which, right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over to project, or rather, let's try that again, object properties as opposed to project optities. And what I'm going to do here is there you can see it's giving me my fountain fill. So I'm going to go to the blue side of the ring. I'm going to come down to my color chip over here. And I'm just going to kind of warm that up, make it a nice, deep, rich orange, something like that. And what I'll then do is I'll jump to the chip on the other side, which happens to be white in this case. And I'd like to just cool that down, just kind of bring in some of the blue that the original artwork had. So we've got something like that. Okay, great. So let's get all of this out of the way just so that we have a little bit more screen real estate here. And what I'll then do is head over to the impact tool and go ahead and choose it. So we've got different possibilities. And the nature of this is it's got this kind of loose drawing style. So fortuitously, there's an impact kind of brush that I'm going to choose that kind of emulates that. And then what I'm going to choose before I get going is I'm just going to ensure that I'm on radial. I'm thinking about 5mm both ways. So you've got, let's go 5 and 3, okay? So just to add a bit of variety in terms of our strokes. I'm then going to go ahead and pull my radials and I get something like that. Let's go ahead and make that 5. I'm going to make it a little thicker. Good. And right alongside that, just let me zoom in once again so you can see this better, is that this, for now, in terms of this very design, it always gets worse before it always does, folks. So let me zoom out. Is that, yeah, that looks horrible. What we're going to do is we're going to randomize the start points. So that's looking a little bit more interesting, and we'll randomize the endpoints as well. So we're getting something a little bit more kind of sparkly in nature. And what I'll do then, very quickly, is I'll go ahead and just give it a color. Let's go for orange, shall we? So there we have an orange, and that looks hideous. So what I'll do is I'll head over to transparency again. And what I'll do here this time is I'll go for a radial transparency. So you can see we've got that kind of radial play, right? So I'm going to move this guy kind of more to the middle. In fact, that's a linear. So let me undo that for a minute and choose radial. There we go. So we've got a kind of more of a radial play, right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and change the blending mode once again. So let's try a screen in this case. See how that pans out for us. Beautiful. So I've got that kind of vibe going, and then that's effectively how I did that. So what about in the context of, I'm just keeping a track of time, I've got about 6 minutes, in the context of an image. So ordinarily I would show you how I would bring in the image and all of that. Here I'm just going to go ahead and delete the impact tool for expediency, nothing more. We're running out of time. So I'm going to go ahead and choose the impact tool once again. And I'm going to go ahead and draw out an impact or a circular impact from the center. And I'm going to change this to, let's go for the second option here. And let's make these guys a little thicker. We'll go 10 both ways, okay. Again, what I'm going to do is just randomize the in and out points. So we've got something like that. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and choose a color. Let's go ahead and make this light. So I'll choose a kind of rich yellow. Let's try that again. There we go. Of course, I can open up the gaps as well, but for purposes of time, I'm going to ask you to experiment with this so I can show you a few more things. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to head over then once again to transparency. And with the object selected, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to choose one of the transparencies we've spoken about. I'm going to go ahead straight over to a bitmap pattern. And what it's going to do is going to take the bitmap pattern and use the algorithms from the bitmap pattern to create my transparency. That looks a little bit more compelling and a little bit more kind of diffuse in the way it's creating my kind of transparency. What I still have control over, of course, is I have control over, which pattern I'm using, as well as the transitions. And here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to again go over to screen. So that works extremely well when you're trying to create kind of highlight vibe. And of course, that's a little too strong. So in this case, I am going to convert to bitmap. Of course, if you're in print, you wouldn't do this value. I'm going to do this for purposes of the webinar. I'll just drop it to 72 so it processes quickly, nothing more than that, guys. And I'm going to OK that. And what then happens is it kind of calculates all of that information. But of course, this is now a new object. And I'll go ahead and knock out the screen again. Now, why did I convert it to bitmap? Because I find the edges a little hard. So I'll go over to bitmaps over here. I'm going to go over to blur and I'm going to run a Gaussian blur. One of my favorite plugins, okay. Pull that back a little bit. Say to about there, excuse me. And what I can then do is, that's probably too much. Let me undo that, do it again. Bitmaps, blur, Gaussian blur. I didn't give the computer a chance to actually show me the preview. So that was my fault, apologies. Yeah, that's better. Okay, I'll say okay to that. And because it's recalculated this object, I can now go ahead and say, listen, let's have another radial gradient going in this. And of course, I can control that at will. So I'll give you, I would suggest you go ahead and experiment with this. How about a flat one? Yeah, flat one works even better. So that's just a straightforward, solid, uniform blur that we've got going on the impact. All right, so moving swiftly on, I'm going to jump back to the to my Connect tool, and I'm going to show you Pointillizer very quickly. I've got 2 minutes, and I needed to show you all of this other stuff, so I guess we'll have to defer some of this, Gio. So let's jump into the Pointillizer.
Hi, Mo.
Yes, Joe.
I think it's worth just taking, if no one minds, then just take the next 5-7 minutes if you want to run through a couple more features.
Yeah, so thank you. Is everybody okay with that? Thanks, Joe. So we'll go till what, about 10 minutes before the hour? Is that okay for everybody?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I've applied a Pointillizer to one of those fills that I actually downloaded. And I wanted to just share with you how one would kind of put this into play in kind of real world scenario. So this again is a piece of clip art. I'm just going to move her to the side for a moment. I'd like to kind of create a fabric kind of vibe, as you probably have worked out. And that piece of clip art, of course, is this one over here. What I did very quickly is I just generally with these pieces of clip art, it tends to throw a white box, which I'm not fond of. So I would generally go over to the object manager. That's the one I just brought in, scroll down, pick up the rectangle, toss that without having to ungroup or any of that stuff. And then the curve I find is a little fat as well, so I'll toss that too. The entire object disappears. Just go ahead and pick that up. Let's do it there. And then, of course, give it a nice, healthy stroke, and you end up with a way more compelling piece of artwork, just in terms of doctoring. And of course, I combined that all into one shape over here. So that's how that was done. So let's toss that, and let's minimize the tray once again. And I'll minimize my object managers. And in fact, I'm going to keep it open because we're going to need it in a minute. Okay, excuse me. So I've got a rectangle that's kind of spanning the surface of my canvas. I'm going to go over to Object Properties, head over to my Fill, head over to my Patterns, and you can see over here that I've got my pattern. So where did that pattern fill come from? And that pattern fill came from these bitmap packs. There are 3 free ones. I'm not going to tempt the internet and attempt to download it in a live demo, but definitely do check them out from the Get More welcome screen aspect or tab, if you will. And here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go ahead and hit escape on that. I'm feeling that's a bit large and in charge, so I'll just drop that to 50%, or 50 millimeters in this case, which is 50%, I guess. And then, of course, head over to my Pointillizer. So let's move this go-to-meeting guy up so I can get to my Pointillizer Docker. There she is. Of course, you can create any shape that you want. And I'm not going to have the time to do that now, so I'll just hit the Apply button. And very quickly, you can see we've got a pointillized pattern. So let's get rid of this box and let's put it to real world kind of experience where I want to create the illusion of fabric. And let's shunt our GoToMeeting guy down and go over to Object Properties once again. And I'll choose the same pattern. And in fact, let's make that 25% its current size. So just a lot finer. That looks great. Of course, I would throw shadow and highlight detail here. And perhaps we can talk about Live Sketch in another webinar. And of course, what I'm going to do here again, once again, is shunt this guy all the way up. And before I go ahead, I'm going to make a duplicate copy of this. And the reason for that is I have 2 copies. Let's just confirm I don't. So let's try that again. Control D. I do now. I'm hopeful of yes. And the reason I'm doing this is this copy, I'm going to get rid of the fill, because you know, the Pointillizer is going to affect my outline and I want a nice clean outline, right? And then I'll send the, yeah, so let's go ahead, and that's the guy with my fill, right? And I'm going to get rid of the stroke on this guy. So sorry, dude, you need to shunt down again. Oh, I can do it here, it's fine. Use my document color palette. So with that done, I'll go over to Pointillizer very quickly. I'm not chatting about these, but you do want to experiment with these most definitely. And there's my Pointillize. It throws it off par just a touch, so I'll just select them both, and then I'll hit P on my keyboard just to center them nicely. And now you've got a nice clean edge with the Pointillizer effect. Here's another example that I've done. Again, if you're going to go back to the office and play with it yourself, there's indeed the artwork for that. Okay, so moving swiftly along, how are we doing on time? I guess I'll be able to squeeze one more in, hey Joe, before we call it tickets. So let me jump back to Connect, and I'll share this one with you, which is a really nice feature, add perspective inside of CorelDRAW. So what I have here, you guys, let's minimize some of these thingy-mabobs, is I've got this screen from the Corel clip art library, and I've got this photograph of a rather modern looking interior from the Corel clip art library. And I've got a background pattern which I liberated from Google. So those are the 3 elements that I have. The element that's liberated from Google, which is basically an interactive kind of modern interface that I wanted to have, has got a transparency thrown on that of the screen, and it's sitting at 50%. Let's move that aside so you can see how this was built. So let me use the pick tool, please. Move that out of the way. We then have this image, and this image, if you look at its transparency values, that's a multiply, so it's strengthening the element. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. My apologies. And let's move it out of the way. And what I added additionally is I added this highlight, which is basically just a gradient fill. If you look at my object properties over here. And that is meant to highlight, in fact, it's just a straightforward flat fill with a transparency running from bottom to top. Okay, and that's, sorry, let's do that differently. And that's to accentuate that, and that's sitting on top of, okay? So that kind of basically just kind of amplifies the screen glare, if you will. So how was this done in under 2 minutes or less? Well, first thing we did is we brought this guy in, and we went over and we brought this guy in, and anytime today, brother. Let's try that again. Okay, let's see. It's trying to tell me time's up, I think. I'll try it one more time. Let's try this guy. So effectively, Corel's misbehaving now. At least the computer's trying really hard to process. Effectively, what I've done there is just to share with you how this was done. Let's put that aside. Let's put that aside. Is once you have your object, which is obviously going to be square, right? And you can see that it is. What you would do is you would go to Effects and you would choose Add Perspective to basically manipulate it. And then, of course, you've got your various elements falling on top of that. And I shall tempt fate one last time. Ha! There you go. Patience, right? So I was saying to you, what we would do is go to Add Perspective. So to get a sense of how this works, because it's difficult to see, what I tend to do is I exaggerate the perspectival points. And then I would obviously zoom in, and I would change the perspectival points as we go along. Okay, so something like that, and then go ahead and nest those into the corner very quickly. And this is the last thing I think I'll have time to show today. And then we'll open the floor to questions if that's okay, Joe and Gio. And of course, Gio needs to say some stuff as well. So this is the last thing I'll show. Otherwise, I'm gonna feel like a mic hog, right? And I'll change this to something like a multiply, and watch how she pops when I do that. You see, it just kind of picks up the values from the screen itself. And that's, I'm afraid, for folks, the way we're gonna have to leave it. And hopefully we'll Joe and Gio to kind of pick up the tail end of the webinar. Thank you very much for joining us, and I'm hoping you got a lot of value from that.
Thank you, Mo. That's brilliant. Thank you. We don't have any questions, so feel free to ask something via the chat menu, or just to get some feedback. If we've got something that's just come through, brilliant. Thank you, Mo. So yeah, if you can just post your feedback on that session, we would really appreciate any comments. But thank you, Mo. So that sort of went through some of the key new features. And Gio, I think you're just going to mention a couple of things at the very end.
Yes. Yes, I mean, we will be sharing the video with you, the recording. So if you just want to, let's say, double check some of the features, or if you want to even just try it yourself, you'll be able to do that. We can also, we'll be sharing the files that Mo was using during the presentation. So those files are available. If you would like to receive them, please drop me an email, and I'll be happy to send you the link to download them. Also, we have kind of a special offer for you in place. Again, just drop me a quick email. As you can see here on the screen, that's the email address, and we'll be sending that offer over to you. So because we got people from multiple regions, we've got different currencies, so that's why it's easier that you send me an email and then we send that one over to you. This one is just the first webinar. We're gonna do more, so you're gonna be receiving more emails. And if you want to send me even some feedback, some features that you would like to see in the next webinar, please feel free to do that. I will be sharing the any comments that you have with or suggestions with Mo. And with the next webinar, we can talk about any specific features that that you would like. So thank you very much for attending. Let me see, Joe, if we have any questions.
No, I don't think so. Just excited, people saying excited for the new webinar. So yeah, just look out for those that will be coming through in the next few, we will hope to have one every month, so the next few months. But just, yeah, on behalf of both myself and Gio, I'd like to say thank you very much to Mo for presenting today, and thank you very much for joining, and we hope to look forward to presenting more webinars to you in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.